Navajo Code Talkers in World War II by Thomas Supko. There were 400 to 500 Navajo Code Talkers. They were an Indian tribe that could speak more than one language. They were used by the U.S. Marines to travel messages back and forth during World War II in the Pacific Theater. They were used because the Japanese did not know any Navajo. The U.S. explored the idea of having Native American people transmitting messages throughout the Pacific Theater. Philip Johnson was the biggest key player for the Code Talkers. He is the one that introduced the idea and started programs to pursue this idea. The Cherokee and Choctaw Indians, however, pioneered code talking during World War I. In 1864, the Civil War was going on. An American officer was sent west on a different mission. Colonel Kit Carson's orders were to get the Navajos who had been raiding in northwest New Mexico. He found them at Canyon de Chelly, but they were also located in other places. The government forced thousands of Navajos to surrender when the soldiers killed their livestock and destroyed their crops. 8,000 Navajos were taken from their homeland in northeastern Arizona and northwestern New Mexico. They were forced to walk hundreds of miles to Bosque Redondo, a parched piece of land in eastern New Mexico. Many of them died of cold and starvation during the walk. The old and the young suffered the most. The government put the Navajo people on a reservation to tame them. When the Navajos got to the reservation on Pecos River, the water was brackish ill when they drank the water and they had to find water elsewhere. In 1873, the government allowed them to go back to their homeland. The government education system required the Navajo children in school to learn English. If they did speak their native tongue, they would have their mouth washed out with soap. Later, when World War II happened, the Navajo children were taught to speak Navajo. In World War I, 19 Choctaw Indians helped the U.S. win the Great War. Philip Johnson is a World War I veteran who had been raised on a Navajo reservation. He showed under stimulate combat conditions that the Navajo could encode, transmit, and decode a 3-line English message in 20 seconds. Machines required 30 minutes. The Navajo language was an unwritten language, so when they got together and made it written language, it would be easier to send messages. Code talkers had to memorize the code. They were not allowed to write anything down so the enemy could not steal them. Instead of learning from an alphabet of 26 letters, they learned from an alphabet of 78 letters. Philip Johnson proposed this idea to Lieutenant Colonel James E. Jones. Jones didn't believe Johnson, but was then amazed 2 weeks later when Navajo people instantly transmitted 6 commonly used military messages. Philip Johnson was a 40-year-old man and wanted to be involved in the Code Talker program as a teacher. He asked to become a Marine and his wish was granted. The Code Talkers participated in every Pacific Marine assault between 1942 and 1945. In 1942, the Code Talkers were sent to Guadalcanal. The objective of the Battle of Guadalcanal was to capture an island before the Japanese could finish building an airstrip on it. It was called Henderson Field after the Marines captured it. The Marines went to go capture Saipan, which was a much-needed base of operations for the Allies. The island would be used for the initial bomb run over Tokyo's industries. The Marines had a lot of support to invade this island, like the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions and massive Naval and Army Air Corps. 1 month before U.S. invasion forces got to Saipan, the American military experienced another disaster called the Second Pearl Harbor. It occurred on May 21, 1944 at West Loch. More than 500 men were killed or wounded. The supplies for the invasion went up in smoke. 6 LSTs, landing ship tank, and 3 LCTs, landing craft tank, were demolished. Those men, supplies, and equipment were needed to get control of Saipan, an important Pacific island, from the Japanese. The Japanese occupied Saipan on 15 June 1944 when America launched an amphibious attack. The Emperor's hero of Pearl Harbor, Vice Admiral Chichini Naguno, was the leader of the Japanese forces. It would be his last battle. Tinian Island, the starting point of Enola Gay's atomic bomb run to Hiroshima, is about 3 miles south of Saipan. Lots of battles were here in the summer of 1944. Some citizens hid in caves at Saipan Island. The Navajo got bodyguards, and the bodyguards were supposed to help them until they were about to be captured, and then they would kill them so the code did not leak. These battles were even more dangerous for the Navajos than other American soldiers. Because of similarities between Navajo and Japanese facial features, U.S. troops sometimes fired at code talkers by mistake. Navajo code talkers transmitted a lot of messages that have saved many lives from dying. During the battle at Iwo Jima, the code talkers relayed more than 800 messages in the first 2 days of fighting, without making one mistake, and the Japanese never cracked their code. The code talkers' work was kept a secret until 1968. Even their shipmates did not know about their secret communication missions. When the Native Americans came back, some businesses still had a sign on saying no dogs or Indians allowed.
Yeah, I would think there was a lot of challenges, not only trying to learn the code and kind of having that pressure, like, hey, you guys are the keepers of the code type of thing, and it was a small group of people that originally started the code. I think Chester talks about in his book that it was originally like 32, I think, and they're all pretty young boys too. That's something you don't realize, is that it's not old men that go to war, it's young boys usually, and so these were all pretty young boys. And so, going to war, it was probably a culture shock to them because a lot of them went right from the reservation to war. And so they didn't even, a lot of them had never really even interacted that much with people off the reservation. A lot of them still spoke their native languages and stuff like that. So, they may not even have that good a grasp of English, before going. And then just the fact that they had the codes too made them a target for the enemy, because once the Japanese knew what was going on, they were hunting for the Navajo. They were really trying to kill them, and that's why I asked if you ever watched that movie Wind Talkers, because there is a certain amount of truth in there that I've heard that they had orders that if one was about to get captured, that they were supposed to kill them. They weren't supposed to let any Navajo fall into the enemy hands, because then they could torture them and try to get the code that way. So, that's you're fighting for Uncle Sam, but at the same time, if you're about to get captured, you might take a bullet from your own troops.
In 1946, an Indian Claims Commission was set up in cases where Native Americans have lost land by the government malpractice. By the 1990s, more than $1 billion have been given in compensation. Little was done for Native Americans during and after World War II. Life on the reservations, poverty, and culture dislocation was still widespread. More Indians lived in cities and urban areas. In 1944, the GI Bill was made a law. This law provided a range of benefits to returning home World War II veterans. Benefits including low-cost mortgages, low-interest loans to start a business, and cash payments of tuition and living expenses. The Native Americans took advantage of this bill. This bill provided many Native Americans as a chance to go to college and have a higher education. Many of them have degrees in law, medicine, and engineering. This bill was not used to build houses on reservations. Some states wouldn't allow Native Americans to vote, and they took this right to the courts. Through the years, barriers forbidding them to vote fell. The influence of veterans from World War II helped other Native Americans find places to live outside of reservations and more rights for them. Still, the federal government did not recognize their special service until long after the war. In 1971, President Richard Nixon awarded a Certificate of Appreciation to the Navajo Code Talkers. He said their patriotism, resourcefulness, and courage have earned them the gratitude of all Americans. On August 14, 1982, Reagan declared it National Code Talker Day. In 2001, the Congressional Gold Medal was awarded to Navajo Code Talkers. Even though in the past, some Americans and some of the American government was not so nice to them, the Code Talkers and Philip Johnson helped them by exploring their ideas and having their bravery to help them. America might not have won World War II, and Native Americans might not have encountered living in cities, going to college, voting, and enduring the rights they should have without the Navajo Code Talkers. And Philip Johnson.